Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. Today we are going to take a look at how to create filters in your Glide app. So Glide does have a native way for you to have in-app filtering, but it's very basic and it requires this particular setup. And the layout that I'm talking about is where you have a list of items here, and it's using one of these first 7 styles. And when we go to edit the tiles list, we have some in-app filtering where we've selected what we want to filter by here, which then gives you the option to filter this one list, this one sheet, by one particular column. But what if you want to filter beyond just that one item, right? Besides the state that they belong to, maybe you want to filter by their city or by their gender or something like that. So in that regard, we can't use one of these first 7 list styles. We have to use a details style list and build the filter ourselves. Now you'll see here that on this particular screen, the source of this list is my people sheet, right? But when we go to build a new screen where we're doing some custom filtering, my recommendation is that we actually don't use the sheet for the list that we're trying to filter, but rather use our user sheet as the source for the screen. And I'll tell you why in just a second. So let's go ahead and delete this tab. And this is the tab I really want to create here, where I still have the same type of list of people, but now I want to create these custom filters using some choice components. Now the reason why our source is not going to be the people sheet, but rather the user sheet, is because then we can use the values that we're writing to our users table in every other sheet, which is going to make our filtering a lot more efficient. Okay, so the setup here is that we have our users table. Right, this is the people that are signing into our app. And then we'll have some columns that will store our choice selection values. In this case, the choice for gender, state, and I said age, but really I want city. Okay. Now, if you are in the user sheet, really these columns don't need to be user specific because by nature your user sheet is user specific. I've gotten in the habit of doing it anyway, though, especially if your source is not Glide tables, but rather like Google Sheets, because then these choice values get written to your spreadsheet and they don't need to live in the spreadsheet. It's a Glide-only feature, right? So I've just been in the habit of using user-specific columns for the choices, but they don't need to be if you're using the users table. Now, one extremely important thing to keep in mind is that when you are using your users sheet as the source for a screen in which you're filtering, you have to make sure that in the options section for that tab, you are filtering the screen where the email is the signed in user. Otherwise, when I go to press these values here, I'll be affecting somebody else's row. You want to make sure that you're only affecting your own row when you're going to filter items. So yes, make sure that the options filter data email is signed in user for the tab that you are using. So back on our screen, we now see that the source here is the user sheet, which means I'm going to have some choice components that are going to write to those columns, right? So I have one for gender. The gender will write to that choice gender in my user sheet, the state for the choice state, and the city for the choice city. The source for these are just what's available, right? I don't want to show more choices than what's currently available because otherwise they might select something that will yield no results. For example, we have Alabama, Florida, and Georgia as people who are living. If I have a state like California in there, if they go to press California, then nothing will appear here because nobody matches that value. So I'm taking my choice components, right? The source of these is taken directly from the list that I'm displaying here, right? So we see the gender is taken directly from the people gender column, and the state is the people state column, and the city is the people city column. So for the choice style, I'm using the chip style just because it can house more than 5 values if I need to, and it kind of keeps things nice and compact. Right? If you start having some options where you're going to have like 30 options for filtering, you probably don't want to use chips because it's just going to stack and push your list all the way down. You want to kind of keep your filtering list as skinny as possible, right? As narrow as possible. So in that regard, you might want to use a drop down instead, right, and kind of condense some things a bit. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just use chips. So once you have your screen set up correctly, then it's just a matter of how do I go about using my choice components as a filter. So ultimately what we want is that when users select a value, it gets written to their user sheet. We want to check that value against the list of users and then filter this list based on the selection. For our first test, I'm just going to go ahead and select male for gender, and we'll see that in the user sheet, male now got written to my row, choice gender. And so now we need to create some functionality that will only filter our list based on my selection. Now there's two methods we can use here based upon whether or not you're allowing your users to select multiple items based on your choice condition, or if you're only allowing them to select one thing at a time, right? So for example, if I want to select males in Alabama and Florida, that's going to be a different method altogether. So first we'll talk about what if the choice selection is only for single options, meaning we're not going to be selecting multiple things. We just want to filter by one category at a time. Okay. Then it's relatively easy. Here's how we set that up. In our data editor, we're going to come over to our people screen. This is the list of things that we want to filter. We already have those values by which we want to filter here in our user sheet. And so now we just have to check against it. So typically what I do is I will create an if-then-else column for every filter type. And I'll call it something like gender filter. It's going to be an if-then-else column. And we're going to result in the values of true or false depending upon whether or not the user should see that item. So first, we need to check, is the user even filtering by gender, right? So if, this is why we're using the user sheet as the source, because now we can access the user profile from any of our other sheets, right? So if the choice gender is empty, meaning they didn't select anything regarding gender, then true. Yes, we want to show it. Okay, you see that I did select something, which is why it's resulting in false at the moment. All right, next we're going to check against the actual item. So if the user profile check gender, choice gender, is the actual gender of the person that I want to filter by, then true, because I want to see that item, else false. Okay, so now you see that because I selected male, male is matching with these three males and thus is resulting in true, right? If I were to change my response to female, we'd see that the bottom three are checked. And if I don't select anything, all 6 should be checked because it's satisfying that is empty condition. All right, so now we have a true false by which to apply our filter. So let's go ahead and go to our inline list here and options, and we're going to filter our inline list based on that true false value that's in our people sheet. So we're going to filter the data where gender filter is true. We could also do is checked, which is something new in Glide. So I'll just choose is checked. All right, so if I select male, I should only see males. Excellent. If I select female, I should only check females. And that works. Now you'll see here that if we allow for multiple, it's not going to work because male comma female doesn't match any of our genders, right? So here we see male comma female. Well, no one is male comma female, so it's not matching anything, so everything is false, which is why I was saying that multiple selections has a different methodology, which we'll get to in just a second. So before we go any further, I'm going to create a filter for the remaining items, the city and the state. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate, and we'll call this city, or let's call this state filter. And we'll just choose the other columns instead. So choice state is empty. Otherwise, if user profile choice state is the state, then true. Okay, so state filter is done. We'll duplicate that. We'll call this city filter. I love duplicate column. It makes things so much faster. All right, so choice city is empty, then true. Otherwise, if user profile choice city is city, then true. Okay. So now, for our inline list, we need to check not only for the gender, but for the state and the city as well. So for our inline list, we'll come back over to options, and we're going to add 2 more filters. we need where state filter is true or is checked, and where city filter is true or is checked. All right, so here's our mail from Alabama. Here's our mail from Florida. And here's our mail from Georgia. Right? Or we could get all genders from Georgia, all from Florida, or all from Alabama. Right? Now, one more filtering we can do on this screen is that our city should be filtered by whatever state we choose, right? Because Athens doesn't belong to Florida, it belongs to Georgia. And if I'm selecting Alabama, I'm not going to choose Atlanta, Alabama, right? So really we want our city filter to be filtered by whatever state we're choosing. So on our choice for city itself, we can employ a filter where we're going to filter where the state is, and here's we can use a cool screen value of our choice state. Okay, so now we see when I select Alabama, I get Birmingham and Montgomery, right? Florida would be Miami and Orlando. And Georgia would be Athens and Atlanta. So what's cool about this is that if I don't select a state, the city doesn't show up because it has nothing to reference, right? So if I choose Alabama and then Birmingham, now I get only Birmingham or only Montgomery, right? Or if I do Florida, I can do Miami or Orlando, right? Now the only part where this kind of breaks down is if I have Orlando selected and then I go back and choose Alabama, right? Because we have our previous selection of Orlando still stored somewhere, right? It's not displaying anything, so we kind of have to choose a city here before deselecting. All right, but what if you want to do multiple? So what if I want to see Alabama and Florida, right? And then see a list of all of those people that belong to Alabama and Florida. So instead of an if then else checking against this one item here, what we have to do is create relations between these values and my selection. Okay. So for example, in my user sheet, if I choose both Alabama and Florida, right, we see in our choice state, we have this comma separated value of Alabama, comma Florida. But there is no value of AL, comma FL in any of these states here, right? So instead what we have to do is we have to split this choice and then relate each of them to the values in people. Okay, so how we do that? First, what we have to do is for each of these columns, we need to split them. So for choice gender, I'm going to add a column to the row. Actually, I'll just duplicate. I'll just call this choice gender split. And this will be a split text column. And the text will be the choice gender. And it's comma separated. Done. All right, I'm going to duplicate that. And we'll call this choice state split, where it's the same setup, but instead of choice gender, it's going to be choice state. And then lastly, choice city. So choice city split, like so. All right, so now that I have these values separated, now we have to make relations from the person to the relation. Okay, so for each of these values, gender, city, and state, we're going to create a relation from the value to my selection. All right, so for gender, I'll duplicate this and we'll call this rel gender, or rel choice, or selected gender. So the type will be relation, and we're going to relate the gender of the person to my split selection of my choice, right? So choice gender split. Check that. All right, done. Okay, next we'll duplicate this and we'll call this rel selected state, where we're going to match the state with the user's choice state split. Done. Okay, we see we got some matches here for both Florida and Alabama because those were the two that I chose. And then lastly, we'll create a relation for the city. So rel selected city, where we'll match the city with the user's choice city split. Done. Okay. I guess we just flip these. Okay. So that being said, now our true-false values are going to change slightly. Right? First, we still want, if it's empty, then true, because we didn't select anything, so we still want to display that person. But now, because we're not matching an is condition, we're going to just check to see if it made a relation. Because if it made a relation here, then it made a match. So we're not doing the match logic here. The match logic is part of this relation, and we're just checking to see, did it make a match? Did it make a relation? Because if so, then it satisfied the condition, and we should show that person. So we're going to change here to if rel selected gender is not empty, then true, else false. Okay, we'll do that for each of them. So this one would be the state is not empty, and for city. So if rel selected city is not empty, then true. Okay, so now we see that it made a match here for both my Alabama and my Florida because of the relation made that match. Okay, so now our filtering, we don't have to change anything about our filter here in our inline list because we're still just checking for those true or false. But now you see that our Alabama and Florida filters are working. Right, here's Alabama and Florida. Now, the only thing that we have to change here is our city filter because the state is not one of these, right? So we need to have here instead maybe where state is included in, right? Still not a great experience, I guess, because I can't choose Miami, Alabama. But I guess this is Miami. These are going to be or conditions anyway, right? So this is Miami, Florida. It's going to know that it's Florida here, right? Or Montgomery and Miami, right? It's going to make the match automatically here. And then just females. So females in Alabama, Montgomery. As you see, it makes all the matches that we want. If I choose male, I'll get the male back again. Right, switch to Georgia. Again, Montgomery still selected, so we need to unselect that and switch to Birmingham or Atlanta. Right, so now our filter is working pretty nicely. So we have Alabama, male, Birmingham, right, or female, Alabama, or all of Alabama, or Alabama and Florida, and so forth. Now you might notice that the more filters that we create, the farther down our filtered list will be pushed on our screen, right? And we really don't want our content well below the fold. So the only other thing we could probably do here would be to hide and show these filters to kind of keep things condensed. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. Either one, all of these filters can live on a separate screen. So we would just have a singular button here that says, filter this list, which will take you to a separate screen, which has this same 3 items that are still affecting those same 3 columns. But then when they navigate back, the list would be completed. Okay, or what we can do is we can just create like a hide show filters button on here, which then just does some smoke and mirrors magic of hiding and displaying these conditions. Let me show you what that would look like. All right, so what we would do here is, because we're living on the user's screen, we would have a column called show filters, and it could be a true false, a Boolean view. I gotta make user specific, it doesn't need to be, but okay. So then what we do here is we have a switch maybe, or a button. How do I want to do this? There's a variety of ways we could do this. I'll keep it simple and start with a switch. The show filters. right? And then what we do is these values, right? We only display them, so we'll set the visibility condition to where show filters is checked or is true. So options, visibility, show when show filters is checked, or city, visibility, show when show filters is checked. Okay. So now we have a toggle to show filters or not show filters, right? This could also be a button or a checkbox, or there's a variety of ways you could do this, but now it kind of keeps our app nice and tidy. Now, the only thing I would want to enhance this is right now we are filtering this list, and you can't really tell we're filtering this list because our filters are hidden, right? So it would be kind of nice to show, like, if you are filtering by something, how many filters are applied. So this is a little bit more advanced, but it's actually quite doable. All we have to do is check how many values we have in our choice selection. Right now this is empty, this is not empty, this is empty. So the easiest way to count things going across is actually using a make array column. So I'm going to call this selection array, and it's going to be a make array. And we're going to add 3 items in this case because we only have 3 selections. So this would be our choice gender, our choice state, and our choice city. And you see that our choices here, even though we selected more than one thing, kind of get grouped as one item as part of that array, right? So if I were to choose male for the gender, right, we see we have 2 items in this array. We have male and we have AL, FL, all right? And then lastly, what we can do is add a roll-up column and call this count filters. This will be a roll-up column. And we're going to roll up the array, the selection array. All right, so now we have a value, 2, for example. All right, we'll leave this. This is the number. Here's another tip we can do if you want like units. You do it if then else. We'll call this filter units. Be an if then else. We'll say if count filters equals 1, then we want the word filter. Otherwise, we'll use the word filters. We could even do like filters applied or filters applied. And then we just combine the 2 things. So we would say this like count filters display. This would be a template column where we combine the 2 things, 1, 2. Those are our 2 things. We'll replace 1 with the actual count, and then 2 with the units. All right, and then we can display this as part of the choice, or part of that selection here. So the description could be something like that. So we see that 2 filters have been applied. If I go back into it, I see that I've filtered by male and by state, right? If I don't select by gender anymore, we now see 1 filter applied. And if we don't select by any state, we see 0 filters applied. And then we can hide our filters. Right, so then it kind of keeps things nice and tidy. 3 filters applied. Now the last thing I want to show is what happens if your users are making filters that don't generate any results. It'd be nice to kind of show a screen here or some sort of help text that says no results applied or no results found. And there's not a great way of doing this beyond counting. So we know that we are choosing 3 filters. But in our people sheet, there are no options here where we actually have 3 items checked. Only 2 items are checked. So here is where you can, again, use some math logic to determine whether or not we should hide or display that no results found. So what we're going to do is count how many of these filters actually made a match. So in order to make this count, we're going to use a make array. We're going to call this filter array, be a make array. We're going to have as many items as you have if then else's. In this case, we have 3. So this will be our gender filter, our state filter, and our city filter. Then we're going to make a roll-up column. And we're going to call this count array. we're going to roll up our filter array by calculating the count true. All right, so now we see that we had 2 trues here, 2 trues here, 1 true, 1 true, and 0 and 0. So none of these equal the number 3. Okay, so then think about this logically. We're on our user screen. So whatever component we place on here, we have to check from the user screen. And the only way we can really make that match between the singular value here against any of the values here is through another relation. So in our user screen, we're going to call this rel filter match, or filter count match. And this will be a relation, and we're going to relate our count filters to the people count array. And we'll match multiple here. And we see that I don't have any matches because 3 doesn't match any of the numbers here. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So now that we know that it didn't make a match, we can place a hint text maybe component here that says like no matches or no results. Please adjust your filters. Right? And we only want this to display when that relation to filter count match is empty. All right? So the moment that a match is made, the hint text goes away. See that? And so even if our filters are hidden, we still see that there's no results. Lets them know to go back in and adjust their filters. All right, and now they can see some results. Oh, looks like, okay. We also don't want to show this when our filters equal 0. So and where rel filter count match, or sorry, the count filters doesn't equal 0. Okay. There we go. So hopefully this gives you some great ideas as to how you can use choice components as filters for your details screen, and you can allow those filters to either be single or multiple depending upon your use case. If you want a copy of this template so you can hit the ground running, all you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel and join as a member, and then you'll get added to my Glide VIP list where you'll have full access to all of the templates that I feature in my YouTube videos. If you have any questions at all, leave me a comment below or reach out to me at Twitter at @rpetito, and as always, thanks for watching.